Okay, so now we know a little JavaScript, and that's going to prove to be really exciting because, as you may or may not have noticed when you look through the Q&A documentation, you can actually use JavaScript inside Q&A markup. You do that in the same way that you would add a link by using the part of an A or an X tag that normally you could put a link in. At the end of the day, that's really just the href tag from an HTML A link. And what that means is you can type a little something in front. You can say JavaScript : and then you can just type JavaScript that will execute when someone clicks on that A or X tag. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to do some cool stuff with JavaScript inside Q&A markup. And then we're going to give you part 2 of your challenge. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something that people have done for a very long time when they want to figure out how something works, which is that we're just going to throw stuff at it and see what's inside. Okay, I like this picture here of this is part of the particle accelerator at CERN, and basically what happens there is, and this is you're going to have to put up with the fact that I used to be a high school physics teacher, but they take high energy particles, they throw them at each other, and then they watch sort of what comes out. And you may have seen some pretty pictures like this. These are bubble tracks. And really what they are is it's just sort of looking at what comes out of these particles when they throw them together. And based upon that, they try to figure out how something works. So this is really just a long-winded way of saying we're going to look inside, in this case, some Q&A interviews that use JavaScript. And we're going to see what makes them tick by looking inside, by taking them apart. It's effectively, it's just an anatomy lesson. We're going to go in, we're going to look at what things do, how they work, and from that, we're going to be able to learn more about how things work. So what I'm going to do is we're just going to open up, and actually I'm going to start with a different one than this. We're going to get to that one. But we're going to go through three increasing levels of complexity of using JavaScript inside a Q&A markup. And we're going to start with the finished interview, and we're going to see what it does, what makes it tick. And from that, we'll try to figure out how you can then implement your own use of JavaScript in a Q&A markup. So here's a little interview that I call, I think I called it What Drink? Okay, this interview is linked below this video, so please take a moment, go ahead, open it up, and then you can follow along. And so basically what it's doing is in this first question, we've gone ahead and we've created a question. We've given it a name of temp. So there's a variable name in this Q&A markup called temp, and it's going to have a value defined by what you click on, what answer. So either hot or cold. And based upon which one you click, in either case, we use this go-to tag, and it's going to go to this question called sweet. Okay, so the behavior is the same if you click on hot and cold. In either case, it goes to this thing called sweet. But the variable temp is going to have a different value, right? It's either going to be hot or cold based upon what you clicked. So if I say hot, it's going to go to the sweet question. It's going to say sweet or bitter. And then there you see we have 2 A tags. Okay, 2 A tags there. And they both use this JavaScript colon. And all that's doing is it's saying, hey, I want to, instead of opening up a web page, I want you to run some JavaScript. And what it's saying here is it's going to have this, we say conditional. And we say, it says if get var temp, and we know this is an evaluation. So it's to say, if this thing is the same as this thing, then do this, else, which means otherwise, do this. So a couple things here that you've never seen before. So you've seen these conditional statements, okay? You've seen these evaluations. What you haven't seen is this get var and go to bits, and those are functions. They are built-in functions that are part of Q&A markup. So actually, if I go to the syntax page, and I look down, predefined JavaScript functions, I can see there a description of what those functions are. And getVar will actually take in a variable name, and it will spit back out the value of that variable in Q&A, okay? And goTo will take a variable name, and then it will cause the Q&A to go to that variable name as if you had used a goTo tag. So effectively, what this is saying if the value of the variable called temp, which we set up here, is equal to hot, then go to the question called cocoa. Otherwise, go to the question called milk. And here, it's saying something very similar. It's saying if that temp variable is equal to cold, go to a question called iced. Otherwise, go to coffee. And that's based upon whether or not you clicked on sweet or bitter. So any guesses what's going to happen here? I can't remember what I clicked. Oh no, here we go. Hot or cold. Here's the beginning. I reopened this page, so it's restarted again. So I'm going to say hot, and then I'm going to say sweet. So any guesses what that's going to do? So we can look at the code. We don't have to guess. We've got this if the temp variable is hot, and then I click sweet, which is what I'm going to do by clicking on this button. Then I'm going to go to cocoa. So that's going to go to cocoa, and it's going to say hot cocoa. All right, let's see. Sweet, hot cocoa, great. If I go back, instead of sweet, I said bitter, what would happen? Well, I had not said hot. So it said if the temp is cold, go to iced, but I didn't say hot. So I'm going to be in this else clause. So it's going to say go to coffee. And so it'll go to coffee and it'll say coffee. So let's see, bitter, coffee, right? And of course, obviously I could get different behavior if instead of hot, I said cold. And if I said sweet, then I get chocolate milk. And if I say bitter, I get iced coffee. Okay, so that's a very simple example of how I can use Q&A and a little JavaScript to get something that has a lot more functionality than I would have if I just had to write it out on sort of standard Q&A without the JavaScript. You could imagine writing out something like this in JavaScript, but then you would be sort of having to do double work. You'd have to figure out the path as you went through hot and sweet, and hot and bitter, and cold and sweet, and cold and bitter. Here we just were able to sort of do double duty, and we just had one question of the hot. They both go to the same place. You just have the sweet buttons once, and based upon the interplay of the variables, or really the interplay of a variable and sort of the logic of the fact that you're clicking on sweet or bitter, having a certain outcome. So that was the what drink. So you could imagine playing around with that. A couple of things to note that are really important. You don't want to be on more than one line. If you take this and, I break this up and I'm like, oh, well, I'm having a hard time reading this, I'm gonna break it up and do something like that. If I do something like that, everything looks good right now, but I get here and I'm gonna say hot, and then I'm gonna say sweet. Okay, actually, that's still working, so it's making a liar of me. But you're gonna find a situation where if you don't keep those on the same line, you will eventually, at some point, run into a problem. So the key there is always practice your demo before you record it, but also the takeaway for you is make sure that you keep these JavaScript calls on a single line. Okay, so let's look at another example. So here's one called, I think it's called the ultimate question. And this is a pop culture reference that some of you may or may not get. The first thing I notice is it goes off my screen here, so I'm gonna hit the word wrap just so that everything's all on one screen. And let's look at what's going on here. So here I have a question, and I'm calling that question number. So that's my variable, and it's asking what's the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. All right, so this is a reference to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And of course, I think some of you might already know this answer. If you don't, you'll figure it out really quick because it's in the code. So I have here, instead of using an A tag, I'm using an X tag. And remember, according to the syntax page, A tags and X tags work the same in all respects, except for an A tag has a predefined value, and an X tag has an open value that you can input. And you can input that in several different data types, right? And so we talked about data types in the JavaScript lessons above. So hopefully that makes some sense to you. Here we're going to want a number. So we go ahead and we do define that. So we've got X, and then our bracket, colon, and then number. And then we see, again, this JavaScript line, this JavaScript colon. And then we have some JavaScript there. And again, we see a conditional. Here, though, instead of just having if, else, we have if, and then else if, okay, which allows us to say, if one set of things true, do this. If another set of things true, do this. And then otherwise do this other thing. And actually, we do that a couple different times. We've got if, else, else. So what we do is we get the variable of the variable called number, and we say if that value is equivalent to 42, which of course is the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything, then we're going to go to the question called right. Okay, and there it's going to say that's right. So that's right. Else, if that value is less than 42, we're going to go to the question called low, and it's going to say too low. And then we're going to say go to number. So we'll just sort of repeat ourselves. Else, if the number is greater than 42, it's going to say go to high. There we're going to get too high. And again, we're going to go back to our number. And then we have this interesting where it says else, if the output is NaN. Okay, so that's something you might see sometimes. It means not a number. And what that's going to say is that it's not a number if the value of the variable, or rather, we're going to NaN. Okay, it's not an output. It's saying else go to NaN. NaN stands for not a number. So basically, if this tries to evaluate whether or not it's equal to 42, less than 42, or greater than 42, and it can't evaluate that, none of those things are going to be true. Then what we can assume is that it wasn't a number, right? Because all numbers are either going to be equal to 42 or less than 42 or greater than 42. So if it doesn't trigger any of those preceding conditionals, then we're going to be in a situation where we know it's not a number. And so we want to tell the person, turns out the answer is a number, and that's not a number. And even though we did have this typeset here as number, and some browsers will mandate that you put a number in there. There are other browsers that won't actually mandate that, especially older browsers. And so it's nice to have a little catch here to say, oh, so it turns out the answer is a number, and that's not a number. And then again, we go back. So let's see what that looks like. So if I say right away, the answer is 43, okay? Well, that's too high, and then it repeats. If I try to type in some text, I'm gonna get a thing that is an error based on the fact that it wasn't a number. But in some browsers, I might be able to write something that wasn't a number. And so it's nice to have that functionality there. All right, sorry, flub things there for a second. So just now that we're back here, I showed you what happened if it wasn't 42. Let's just show you that what happens if it is 42. 42, and that's right. Okay, so that's your little bit there. And our third and final interview we want to look at is an example integer calculator, which is what you were tasked with making in the last round. Except now I'm going to actually be able to take in numeric values. So let me just show you what this looks like without going through the code here first. This one we'll run through and see what it looks like. So do you receive public subnets? I'm going to say no. The reason I'm going to say no is because actually I know that if I had gone and I had said yes, then I just qualified by virtue of the rule without having to figure out any math. So I'm going to say no. How many people are in your household? I'm going to say 1. Okay, and then how much income does your household bring in per year after taxes? I'll just say, I'll say $10,000. Okay, and as I say, are you facing a civil or criminal matter? Now this is more complicated. Then you have to get a stretch goal for the previous project and for this one, or for the previous part of this project and for this, would be to also think about the civil context. We're just worried about criminal, so we'll do that. We'll say criminal, and to say you probably qualify as indigent since you earn less than 125% of the poverty line. So I was doing some math there. I could go back, right, and I could say if my after-tax income, let's make it 100,000, okay, and I say criminal, it's going to say you probably won't qualify as indigent or indigent but able to contribute since you earn more than 250% of the poverty line. So you'll probably need to hire an attorney. Would you like to search for one near you? And then I can click yes, and here I made a little thing here, so it goes off and looks to find a lawyer over at Avo. All right. All right, so it's just an example of how that works. Let's see what's actually going on here under the hood. There are a couple of things. One, you'll recognize this bit of code up here in the before part. That is what gives us our nice little front part here. It gives us our title. It gives us our header. It gives us our nice little disclaimer. And so you included this, of course, in your DACA or something similar in your DACA interview. Obviously, you're going to want to change the title as it shows up here. That bit there is what makes this. And this bit here is what would be the title of the page if we were to open it up as an own page. The interesting part, though, is how is it doing the math? What's it doing? And so what we actually do is we create a function. We write a function to handle the indigency guidelines. And so here's the function. What's nice here is I'm giving you the function, so you're not going to have to recreate this. You're going to be able to incorporate it in the next part of this challenge here. But what this function does is we call it fedpov. It takes in the household size, so the number of folks in your household, the income of the household, and then the percentage you want as the cutoff. And so it's going to, and here's some little notes in the function itself, determines your income is less than or equal to the percentage that you specify for the 2020 federal poverty guidelines, for example. And here's where you can find the guidelines. And so what happens is there's a variable that we define called line that starts off, not a number, but then based upon your household size, will then get set to some value. And these are the values you'd recognize from the federal poverty guidelines. If you have more than 8 folks in your house, that value is 44,120 plus an additional 4,480 for each additional member in your household. And then basically what we do is we say, hey, if your income that you put into the function is less than or equal to whatever percentage of the poverty guideline, of the poverty line you put in, then we're going to return true. Otherwise, return false. So this is basically saying if I put in here, I said my household was 1, so the poverty line would be set to 12,760. And if I said my percentage was 100%, okay, then basically what would happen is be looking to see if it was less than that, okay, less than or equal to that. And if it was, it would say true. And if it wasn't, it would say false. So hopefully you recognize this idea of this function from the JavaScript stuff, lessons above. And so let's just see how that played in here. So we can actually jump and sort of see where this is happening. This is happening with the are you facing criminal or civil matters? And you'll see that there are different things going on for the criminal or the civil. Again, the civil was a stretch goal, so not it doesn't apply for everyone's interview. So don't freak out if you're like, but I don't know what that is. You don't have to. But if we look here at this, I'll go ahead, I'll wrap the bit here so we can see what it is. And it's basically saying, hey, we're using this function, this fedpov function, which we defined up here. And what we did is we defined it in the after tag. So what this means is that on the HTML page, that is the output for the Q&A, this is actually being defined at the very end of that page. That's what the after means. So it sort of comes after all of this. So it's defined there in the source of the HTML page. And what this is saying is that we're going to use that function. We're going to give it the following parameters: the value of the house variable. So that was something that was defined here. So we had a house variable, how many, and that was a number. So it takes in that value of that variable that we asked. Then the value of the income variable. So again, we had previously a question that was about income, and it was a number, and so we're getting the value of that. And then we specify the percentage. So your jurisdiction might be different. It might be 105%. It might be 110% of the guideline, whichever it is. But here basically says, if it's 125%, then go to qualify criminal. Okay, remember that's what our go-to says. Else, if it's 250% or below, then go to not qualified, but, so remember that's our indigent, but able to contribute. Otherwise go to not qualify. You can see how you can follow that all through and read that by just seeing where these goes here. So I can see here's my qual criminal, you probably qualify, qual, you probably qualify as indigent but able to contribute, and then not qualify, which is the other one that we saw there. So what you can do is in this next challenge, you can actually go ahead and use this code. In fact, I want you to use this code as the basis for your next challenge. That being said, there are two parts of the next challenge. One you should do before we meet in class, and the other that you should do one, and the other that you should do after we meet in class. So this first one is just adjust your flowchart to incorporate feedback from your testing and to accommodate the use of user input numeric variables. So your flowchart actually might have already done this, but if it didn't, you should adapt it to do this. So what that means is you can have the decision points in your flowchart do math. So you can say basically, if the person's, ask them their income, if it's over this, then do that, et cetera, et cetera. So change your flowchart, get that all ready before our class meeting. And then the thing that we will do together in class is we will take this new flowchart that you've made before we come together, and we will then turn it into a new Q&A interview. And you can use now your knowledge of how to use JavaScript to actually do some math and to use that to help you get through the interview. Now, the other important thing that I didn't mention, but I should have mentioned, is that when you're making this new flowchart, you don't want to just incorporate the ability to do math and use JavaScript. You actually want to incorporate that feedback you got from the user testing you did last week. So remember when you sat down with your peer review partner and had them walk through all the different scenarios, you captured all the things that did and didn't work. That wasn't last week, that was earlier this week, sorry. And you captured all that information, but before our meeting. And so you want to incorporate that input as well. So this is your opportunity to work on that iterative design that we were talking about. So you've built something, you put it in front of someone, you've got their feedback, you're going to incorporate that feedback, and you're also going to incorporate these new skills you've learned into your interview. The flow chart is the part that we want done before class, though. And of course, you did the interview in the previous part one of the mission already as well. And then we will start together in class on Monday, working on the actual interview, incorporating the use of JavaScript. And so I will see you all very soon. And as always, good luck.